official rounds in 17 months.
I can't believe that there was
same thing with Mexico, same thing with Japan.
Covered under the existing free trade agreement
that he'd already
keep alive. The deal goes by two names, CUSMA in Canada and USMCA in the United States, and it is the same pact that Trump built during his first term and paraded as one of his signature victories. And now, at the very first mandatory review of that agreement, the Trump administration has said it does not want to extend it in its current form. Think about that for a second. The United States is the country walking away, not Canada, not Mexico, but Washington itself, rejecting a renewal that its two closest neighbors were the ones requesting. So the question that hangs over everything I'm about to tell you is simple. Why would a president refuse to renew his own creation, the deal he branded as a triumph? And what happens to Canada, to Mexico, and to millions of workers now caught in the middle of it? Let me take you back to where this starts. Because to understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what this agreement actually is. When Trump entered his first term, he made no secret of how much he disliked the old framework that governed trade across North America.
U.S. President Donald Trump casting doubt on the future of CUSMA, calling it irrelevant.
I don't even think about USMCA.
He called it one of the worst deals ever made. He promised to tear it up. And eventually his administration sat down with Canada and Mexico and negotiated a replacement. That replacement became CUSMA in Canada and USMCA in the United States. And when it was done, Trump did not treat it as a compromise or a reluctant fix.
We'll again go to Washington next week, hoping to iron out irritants for this country's agreement. Rafi Bujikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
He treated it as a personal accomplishment. He stood in front of cameras and called it historic. He described it as a modern, fair, and balanced arrangement that would finally put American workers first. It was, in his own telling, proof that he could do what his predecessors could not. This was his deal, with his name on it, sold to the public as a win. Built into that agreement was a clause that almost nobody outside of trade circles paid attention to at the time. But it is the clause that brings us to this exact moment. The three countries agreed that 6 years after the pact took effect, they would sit down together for a mandatory joint review. Not a renegotiation from scratch, not a tear-it-up moment, but a scheduled check-in. A chance to look at the deal, confirm they all still wanted it, and if they did, effectively extend its lifespan for many years to come. It was designed as a stability mechanism, a way to give businesses and governments the confidence that the rules would not vanish overnight. That 6-year mark arrived on the 1st of July, 2026, and this is where the story turns. On that day, at that first mandatory review, the United States Trade Representative, Jamieson Greer, delivered the message on behalf of the Trump administration. The United States, he said, does not want to extend the agreement in its current form. That is the sentence that set everything in motion. It was not a threat to blow up the deal in a single afternoon. It was not a declaration that trade across North America was over. But it was a refusal, a clear signal that Washington was not going to sign off on the smooth, multi-year extension that the review was designed to deliver. And the reason that lands so hard is the name attached to the original agreement. This is Trump refusing to renew the deal that Trump built. This is the author declining to reauthorize his own work. Now, I want to be precise here, because there is a version of this story that got told in a lot of places, and I think it misses the sharpest point. A lot of the early framing treated the 1st of July as some kind of funeral for free trade, as if the whole system had collapsed in a day. That framing is dramatic, but it is not really what happened, and it actually hides the more interesting truth. The more interesting truth is not that free trade died. The more interesting truth is that the man who authored this agreement, who signed it, who branded it as a personal triumph, is the one who walked away from it. And he did so while his two partners were standing there asking for the opposite. Because here is the detail that reframes the entire thing. Both Canada and Mexico had said, going into this review, that they wanted CUSMA extended. They were not the reluctant parties. They were not dragging their feet. Both of them signaled they were open to discussing amendments, willing to talk about adjustments, willing to sit at the table and work through changes. In other words, Canada and Mexico showed up ready to keep the deal going. It was the United States, and the United States alone, that said no to the clean extension.
Very well for the U.S., and for Canada.
Trump says his team hasn't been focused on Canada, but has been working diligently to get a deal with the EU.
That makes Washington the lone holdout. One country out of three, rejecting a renewal that the other two were actively requesting. And that country happens to be the one whose president once held this same agreement up as the crowning achievement of his trade policy. You can feel why Canada, in particular, was caught off guard. From the Canadian side, the logic going in seemed straightforward. Here was a deal that had been negotiated in good faith, that had been in force for years, that all three governments had signed, and that Canada was prepared to renew and even refine. The review was supposed to be the moment where everyone confirmed they still wanted the arrangement and moved forward with certainty. Instead, Canada walked into that room ready to extend and walked out of it facing a United States that had decided it did not want to play along.
Well, I can. It expires very shortly, and we could have it or not. It wouldn't matter to me. I think they want it. I don't really care about it.
The certainty that the review was meant to provide simply evaporated. Canada never saw it coming, not because Canadians are naive, but because the refusal came from the very country that had every reason, on paper, to want its own deal preserved. So let me be very clear about what this refusal does and does not do, because the difference matters enormously, and it is where a lot of people get confused. The announcement on the 1st of July does not terminate the agreement. CUSMA is not dead. The pact is still in effect. In fact, on its current schedule, the agreement still has roughly 10 years left to run. There is a mechanism, a possible 16-year extension, that could have been triggered by a successful review, and that is the piece that did not happen. But the failure to trigger that long extension is not the same thing as ending the deal. Non-renewal does not equal termination. The agreement survives, at least for now, sitting on its remaining lifespan, still legally in force, still the framework governing trade across the continent. But, and this is a very large but, the tariffs stay. This is the part that hits real people in real industries. Throughout this period, the Trump administration has kept punitive tariffs in place on a range of Canadian goods: steel, aluminum, cars, and lumber. Those tariffs remain right where they are. The refusal to renew the agreement does nothing to lift them. So you end up with this strange, uncomfortable arrangement. On one hand, the deal itself is still alive, still technically in force, still promising a decade of continued life. On the other hand, the certainty that was supposed to come with a full renewal is gone, and the tariffs that squeeze Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, Canadian cars, and Canadian lumber are still biting. Canada is left in the worst of both worlds. The stability was taken away, but the pressure stayed. Picture what that means for the people who actually live inside these industries. A steel worker in Canada, a plant manager, someone running a lumber operation, someone building cars. For years, they operated under a set of rules that was supposed to be reliable, backed by a signed agreement among three governments. The review was their chance to hear that the rules would hold, that they could plan, invest, hire, and build for the next several years without wondering whether the whole framework might shift.
Canada would love it. Canada wants it. They need it. Because we don't need Canada product. That's the thing. You know, I want to be a nice person, but we don't need... I want to build the cars here, not...
Instead, they got the opposite message. They got uncertainty at the top, layered on top of tariffs that were already making their products more expensive to sell into the American market. That is a difficult place to run a business. You are not facing a clean break that you can adjust to. You are facing an open question, an ongoing ambiguity, with a cost attached to it every single day. And the ripple effects of that do not stay contained inside one factory or one industry. When a major trade framework loses its certainty, the uncertainty travels. It moves down through supply chains, into the smaller suppliers who feed the big manufacturers, into the trucking and logistics companies that move goods across the border, into the communities whose whole economies are built around a single plant or a single sector. A tariff on Canadian steel is not just a number on a spreadsheet in a government office. It becomes a decision about whether a new order gets placed, whether a shift gets added or cut, whether a company expands or waits.
Between the U.S, Canada and Mexico, that the U.S. could pull out, could terminate it with just the president say so and without him needing congressional.
Multiply that across steel, aluminum, cars, and lumber, and across a border that handles an enormous volume of trade every single day, and you begin to see why the loss of certainty at that 1st of July review is not an abstract political story.
I've ever seen.
and I made it better, but I had the right to terminate. And, you know, with NAFTA, we didn't have the right to terminate. I had to get these senators to approve that deal. That was a tough.
It is something that quietly touches an extraordinary number of ordinary lives on both sides of the line. And that ambiguity is now the defining feature of the whole situation. Because instead of the smooth, long extension that the review was built to produce, the agreement now shifts into a different rhythm entirely. It moves into annual reviews. Rather than one big check-in every 6 years that locks in stability for a long stretch, the three countries are now looking at coming back to the table year after year, revisiting the arrangement on a much shorter cycle. That changes the psychology of everything. A 6-year review with a long extension attached says, "We are committed, plan accordingly." An annual review says, "Nothing is settled, check back next year."
Manage the expectations on that and hitting the August 1st deadline.
We are looking for the best deal for Canada. We're only going to accept the best deal for Canada.
For businesses, for governments, for workers, that shift from long-term certainty to a year-by-year process is enormous, even if the underlying deal is technically still alive. It is worth pausing on why that 6-year review was written into the agreement in the first place, because it tells you what everyone expected this moment to be. When the three countries designed this pact, they knew that trade deals live and die on confidence. They knew that if businesses feared the rules could vanish at any moment, they would hold back on the very investments that make an economy grow. So they built in this scheduled review as a kind of reassurance, a promise that at the 6-year mark the partners would come together, look each other in the eye, and confirm that the arrangement would carry on for a long stretch to come. It was meant to be a moment of renewal in the truest sense, a reaffirmation of trust between neighbors. That is exactly what makes the outcome so striking.
We want to make them here. And that's what's happening. Everybody's moving here. From Canada, they're coming here. From Mexico, from Japan, from Germany, from all over the world.
The mechanism designed to deliver reassurance instead delivered doubt. The check-in that was supposed to lock in stability became the moment stability slipped away. And it slipped away not because the deal had failed on its own terms, but because one partner, the one who built it, chose not to say yes. So where does this go from here? That is the question everyone is now asking. And the honest answer is that nobody knows for sure. But there are voices worth listening to, people who have sat at these tables before and understand how these negotiations actually unfold. One of them is Canada's former chief trade negotiator, someone who has been through the grinding, patient work of hammering out these agreements. And the read from that experienced perspective is that these talks are not going to wrap up quickly. The expectation is that negotiations will likely run well beyond the United States midterm elections, and possibly stretch into next year. In other words, this is not a matter of a few weeks of back and forth followed by a tidy resolution. This is shaping up to be a long, drawn-out process, one that could carry on for many months, with the calendar itself becoming part of the strategy. And that raises the real strategic question sitting underneath all of this. Why would Trump refuse to renew a deal he built, unless the refusal itself is the strategy? Because there are essentially two ways to read what he is doing. The first reading is that this is leverage. Trump takes his own creation, the agreement with his name on it, and instead of renewing it cleanly, he holds it open, dangles it, uses the uncertainty as pressure. Under this interpretation, the plan is to keep Canada, and Mexico too, in a state of not knowing, to squeeze with the tariffs, to let the annual review process grind on, and to keep pushing until he gets terms he considers better, until, in blunt terms, the other side folds. The deal becomes a tool, a lever he can keep pulling for as long as the other countries need the certainty he is withholding. The second reading is quieter and in some ways more unsettling. It is the possibility that non-renewal simply becomes a permanent state of limbo. Not a dramatic collapse, not a clean renegotiation, but a slow settling into ambiguity that never really resolves. Under this interpretation, the refusal to extend is not a chess move building toward a new and better deal. It is just the new normal.
European Union. He's now in Scotland and set to meet with European officials.
I think we have a good 50-50 chance. That's a lot.
Canadian officials say they...
The agreement stays technically alive on its remaining years. The tariffs stay in place. The annual reviews come and go without producing any grand resolution. And everyone gradually gets used to operating in a gray zone where nothing is ever fully settled and nothing is ever fully broken. That is a strange way for a major trade relationship to exist, suspended between life and death. but it is a genuine possibility given how this has played out. The truth is, we cannot yet know which of those two roads this takes. Is Trump using his own creation as leverage until Canada gives him what he wants? Or does the non-renewal quietly harden into a kind of open-ended uncertainty that just lingers year after year?
In the Oval Office this morning from President Trump.
Kate, thank you. That is Kate Fisher, live in Washington.
Both are on the table. And the reason this particular story is so compelling is that it does not fit the neat narrative that a lot of people expected. The expected narrative was collapse, a big dramatic ending. What actually happened is more subtle and honestly more revealing. The United States chose not to renew a deal that was working well enough that its two partners wanted to keep it. The president who authored that deal chose to walk away from his own signature, and the countries left holding the uncertainty are the ones who came to the table ready to say yes. Let me pull back and think about what this reveals about the moment we are in. For a long time, the assumption underlying trade in North America was that the framework, whatever its flaws, was stable. Governments changed, politics shifted, but the basic architecture held. This agreement was supposed to be the modern embodiment of that stability, the updated version that would carry the continent forward. The fact that it now sits in question, not because it failed, but because the country that built it decided not to reauthorize it, tells you something about how fluid these arrangements have become. Nothing is guaranteed simply because it was signed. Even an agreement branded as historic by the very leader refusing to renew it can be left hanging. That is a lesson every government watching this will take to heart, and it puts Canada in a genuinely difficult position that goes beyond just steel and aluminum and cars and lumber, because the deeper issue is trust. When you negotiate an agreement, part of what you are buying is predictability. You are agreeing to rules so that you do not have to renegotiate every single year, so that you can plan, so that your industries can invest with some confidence about the future.
Be on all Canadian goods not covered under the existing free trade agreement. Ottawa first said it was aiming for a tariff-free deal, but has recently
What this refusal signals to Canada and to Mexico is that even a completed, signed, celebrated agreement can be reopened, questioned, and left in limbo whenever the political winds shift in Washington. That changes how you approach every future negotiation. It changes what you are willing to give, what you demand in return, and how much faith you put in the durability of anything you sign. The damage there is not measured in a single tariff. It is measured in the erosion of confidence that a deal means what it says. For Mexico, the calculation is similar but distinct. Mexico, like Canada, went into this review wanting the agreement extended, willing to discuss amendments, ready to keep the arrangement going. Mexico is now in the same position of watching the United States hold back, of facing a future defined by annual reviews rather than long-term certainty. The two neighbors, Canada and Mexico, find themselves on the same side of this, both having asked for continuity, both having been met with a refusal from the partner in the middle. That shared experience could shape how they coordinate going forward, how they approach the annual reviews, and how they position themselves against a United States that has shown it is willing to be the lone holdout. There is also the matter of timing, and timing here is not an accident. The expectation that these negotiations could stretch past the United States midterm elections and into next year means that this whole process is now entangled with domestic American politics. Trade becomes a political instrument, something that plays out against the backdrop of elections and campaigns and the shifting calculations that come with them. The longer the uncertainty lasts, the more it becomes woven into that political fabric. And for Canada and Mexico, that is deeply frustrating, because it means the fate of their industries is tied not just to careful negotiation, but to the rhythms of an American election cycle they have no control over. They are, in a very real sense, waiting on a clock that is being run in Washington. So when I step back and look at the whole picture, what strikes me most is the irony at the center of it. This is a story about a leader refusing to renew his own deal, and that refusal is the entire heart of it. Trump signed this agreement. Trump called it historic. Trump sold it as a personal triumph, proof of his ability to deliver where others could not. And now Trump is the reason it sits unrenewed, the reason Canada and Mexico face annual reviews instead of certainty, the reason the tariffs stay, the reason the whole arrangement hangs in a kind of suspended animation. The country asking to keep the deal is not the one that made it. The country walking away is the one whose president bragged about building it. That reversal is what makes this more than just another trade dispute. It is a genuine puzzle about strategy, about leverage, and about what a signature is worth when the person who signed it changes his mind. And for now, that is exactly where things stand. The agreement is not dead. It still has roughly a decade of life on paper. But the long extension that the review was supposed to deliver did not happen.
Japan's paid us billions and billions of dollars for the privilege of making cars here and selling cars.
The tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, cars, and lumber remain in force. The process has shifted into annual reviews that could drag on well past the American midterms and into next year. Canada has lost its certainty while keeping every one of the costs. And the biggest question of all remains wide open. Will Trump use his own creation as a lever, squeezing until Canada bends? Or does this quietly settle into a permanent, unresolved limbo where nothing is fixed and nothing is finished? Both futures are possible. Neither is comfortable. And all of it flows from one remarkable decision: a president declining to renew the deal he once held up as his own masterpiece. What we do know is that the coming months will tell us which direction this takes. Every annual review from here becomes a new pressure point. Every statement out of Washington will be parsed for signals about whether this is negotiation or drift. Canada and Mexico will keep pressing for the stability they came looking for, and the United States will keep deciding, review by review, whether to grant it.
Those negotiations are set to determine whether another deal will be worked out or if it will be left to expire.
You don't think you're going to renegotiate USMCA?
The story that began on the 1st of July 2026 with a single refusal at a single meeting is really just the opening chapter of something that could stretch on for a long time. The deal that Trump built and then declined to renew is now the deal that everyone is watching to see whether it lives, lingers, or eventually fades. Thank you so much for watching this breakdown of Trump's refusal to renew the CUSMA and USMCA trade deal with Canada and Mexico. If you found this useful and you want to stay on top of exactly how this trade standoff between the United States, Canada, and Mexico develops from here, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. There is a lot still to come on this story: the annual reviews, the tariffs, and the open question of what Trump does next. And I want you here for all of it.
Canada. We used to build cars in Canada. Now, the Canada cars, the Canadians are moving here to build cars. Same thing with Mexico. Same thing with Japan.
Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.